The conference room hummed with derisive laughter. Ava Thompson watched her colleagues toss aside the latest AI updates, calling them nothing more than a passing digital fad. They leaned back in their chairs, dismissive and loud, while Ava kept her focus on the glow of her monitor. She did not argue. She did not defend the technology. Instead, she turned to her terminal, her fingers moving with a rhythm that cut through the office noise. She typed a precise, multi-layered instruction, closing the gaps in the logic that her peers refused to see. The cursor blinked once. Then, it began to stream data. A complete, flawlessly structured market analysis filled the screen in under 10 seconds. The contrast was absolute. While the room echoed with skepticism, Ava sat in total silence, watching the numbers align into a roadmap for a success they could not even imagine. She tapped a final key to lock the results, her expression unreadable. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that the game had just shifted in the shadow of a single desk. The office lights dimmed, but for Ava, the real work started when the city went black. She retreated to her desk, the only light coming from the steady, rhythmic flicker of her monitor. She did not sleep. She opened a fresh notebook, the pages crisp and empty, and began the cycle. Type a string, execute. Watch the error log scroll by in a blur of red text. Correct. Repeat. She dissected the underlying syntax line by line, hunting for the friction points that caused the AI to stumble. Her coffee went cold, then bitter, then forgotten. Every failure was a heavy mark on the paper. She documented the variables, the syntax failures, and the logic loops that led to dead ends. Her hands cramped, yet she kept the pen moving, mapping the architecture of the system as if she were learning a new language. 100 attempts yielded nothing but noise. She wiped the terminal clean and started again, her focus narrowing until the room felt like it had shrunk to the size of her keyboard. She was not just learning to use a tool. She was mapping the boundaries of what the technology could do, one failed line of code at a time. 6 months of silence ended with a knock on her door. A local business owner stood there, his face tight with the strain of a failing sales funnel that was draining his margins dry. He did not ask for a miracle, he asked for a fix. Ava did not hesitate. She cleared her desk, shifted her monitors, and pulled him into the chair beside her. For 4 hours, the room hummed with the sound of rapid, precise input. She bypassed the standard interface, injecting her custom prompt framework directly into his workflow. Early on, the data hit a wall, a structural bottleneck she had not anticipated. She paused, her eyes scanning the code, and rerouted the logic in seconds. The owner watched as the chaotic flow of leads began to reorganize into a clean, predictable stream. She did not explain the mechanics, she simply tightened the system until the friction vanished. By the time she finished, the terminal displayed a stable, optimized path where there had been only confusion. She sat back, the glow of the screen reflecting in her eyes, and watched the system hold its new shape. The theory was gone, the application was real. The results did not arrive as a slow climb. They hit the dashboard like a shockwave. Within 7 days, the conversion metrics jumped 40%, a sharp, vertical line that silenced the skepticism of the business owner. He refreshed the page 3 times, his fingers hovering over the mouse, waiting for the numbers to revert to their old, failing state. They did not. The system held. Ava watched him trace the graph with a trembling finger, his panic replaced by a look of sudden, profound relief. He turned to his desk, pulled out a checkbook, and wrote a figure that stopped Ava in her tracks. He slid the slip of paper across the desk. It was an amount equal to her entire monthly salary at the firm she left behind every morning. She looked at the digits, then at the optimized funnel on her screen. The math was simple, but the realization was heavy. Her knowledge, built in the dark of her apartment, possessed a market value she had only guessed at until now. She took the check, folded it, and felt the weight of it in her palm. The corporate ladder she had been climbing now seemed like a relic of a different life. She had proof. She had power. The next morning, the office felt different. The air was thick with the same stale coffee and recycled chatter, but Ava moved through it like a ghost. She walked past the rows of desks where her colleagues still debated tools they refused to understand. Her manager stopped her, his brow furrowed as he pointed to a spreadsheet on her monitor. He asked why she was wasting time on non-standard scripts. Ava didn't defend her work. She didn't explain the logic. She simply saved her files to a drive, stood up, and handed him her resignation letter. He laughed, assuming it was a joke, until she walked to the supply closet, picked up her bag, and turned toward the glass doors. The sound of her boots on the floor was the only noise in the room. She pushed the heavy door open, stepping into the sunlight of the lobby. 10 minutes later, she sat in a quiet cafe with a laptop and a blank browser. She filed the paperwork for her own consultancy, naming the firm with a single word. She watched the confirmation screen blink into existence. The corporate path was behind her. The technical confusion of the market was now her landscape to navigate. She was no longer an employee. She was the architect. The inbox grew into a tidal wave. Firms drowning in technical debt reached out, their desperate messages piling up until the notifications became a constant, rhythmic pulse on her screen. Ava stopped sleeping in shifts and started working in cycles. She mapped the needs of every new enterprise client, identifying the recurring friction points that slowed their operations to a crawl. She didn't just build solutions, she built a factory of logic. One Tuesday, the system hit a wall. The volume of data requests spiked, and her server load spiked with it. For 6 hours, she sat in the dark, fingers flying across the keys, rewriting the core architecture of her own framework to survive the surge. She bypassed redundancies, optimized the syntax, and pushed the update live just as the morning light hit her desk. The system stabilized. Millions in overhead costs evaporated for her clients within the next 48 hours. Her calendar was no longer a schedule. It was a wall of locked-in commitments. She was managing the digital infrastructure for 5 separate corporations, each one demanding more, each one paying a premium for her specialized focus. The pressure was no longer an obstacle. It was the fuel that kept her systems running at peak capacity. The request arrived on a Tuesday, a formal invitation from a Fortune 500 conglomerate. Ava entered the boardroom, a space of glass and polished steel, where the air felt thin and filtered. The executive sat at the head of the table, his demeanor cold and measured. He didn't want a consultation. He wanted a total system overhaul. He listed the failures of their current internal AI, his voice clipped and impatient. Ava didn't speak. She opened her laptop, bypassed the firewall with 3 precise commands, and pulled up a real-time visualization of the company's data bottlenecks. The executive stopped talking. He watched the screen as her custom framework identified the inefficiencies in seconds. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the shifting data. He didn't ask how she did it. He simply pushed a thick document across the mahogany surface. The signature line was already waiting. Ava read the terms. The project fee was a single, staggering number. It exceeded her entire annual income from the previous year. She took the pen, the weight of it cold and heavy in her hand. One firm stroke finalized the agreement. The executive stood, extending a hand to seal the partnership. Ava felt the shift in the room. This was no longer just a contract. It was the absolute validation of her years in the dark. The office was silent when she returned. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city pulse was a distant blur of amber and violet light. Ava sat at her desk, the stillness of the room a sharp contrast to the high-stakes pressure of the boardroom. She opened her laptop. The screen glowed, illuminating the stacks of notebooks pushed to the edge of the mahogany. She navigated to the banking portal. The cursor blinked. She clicked the refresh button. A loading bar crawled across the screen, a thin line of blue moving with deliberate, frustrating precision. Her heartbeat sounded loud in the quiet room. She stared at the digits. The page updated. 7 figures. The number sat there, static and final, a hard mathematical reality. She was 32. She leaned back, the leather chair creaking as she exhaled for the first time in hours. The weight of those 6 months of solitary, late-night code, the trial and error, and the countless failures finally collapsed into this single, undeniable total. It was not just currency. It was the physical manifestation of every hour spent in the dark while the rest of the world looked away. She watched the city lights, the reflection of the screen ghosted over the glass, and saw the gap between who she had been and what she had built. The office door clicked open. A young intern stood on the threshold, holding a tablet and looking at Ava with a mixture of curiosity and hesitation. He asked how she had achieved such rapid growth in an industry that usually took decades to master. Ava did not look at the city view. She turned her chair and pointed to the stack of worn, leather-bound notebooks cluttering the corner of her desk. The spines were cracked, the pages thick with notes, diagrams, and dense blocks of logic. She told him, "I learned before I was paid." She pulled one of the books toward her, flipping through pages filled with months of failed test results and refined syntax. She explained that while the rest of the industry waited for the hype to settle, she had spent her nights mastering the mechanics of the technology. She did not chase the trends that others were obsessed with. She built the foundation. The intern looked from the notebooks back to her, seeing for the first time the months of labor hidden behind the current professional success. Ava closed the book, the sound of the cover hitting the desk resonant and final. She had moved past the need for validation. Ava turned back to the glass. The intern left the office, his footsteps fading into the quiet of the hallway. She stood up and walked to the window, placing her palms against the cool surface. Below, the city grid stretched in a 5 sen, a complex circuit board of movement and light. She realized then that she had not just mastered a piece of software, she had mastered the art of arriving before the crowd. She watched the traffic patterns, the way the headlights moved in synchronized waves, and saw the future as a series of variables waiting to be solved. Curiosity had been her only compass, and it had led her to this vantage point. She looked at her reflection in the glass, a silhouette framed against the sprawling skyline. The uncertainty that had once defined her early days in the firm had been replaced by the quiet confidence of someone who understood the architecture of the coming age. She leaned her forehead against the pane. Breathing in the stillness of the room, she was ready for the next iteration. She reached back, pulled her laptop lid down with a soft click, and watched the room darken. The screen went black, but she did not move. She remained there, watching the lights, already calculating the next move before anyone else had even identified the problem.